Funny Games. Is it great? Few films can invoke an emotional response as intensely as Funny Games does. It took me about a week and a half to force myself to rewatch this film in preparation for this review. It's the kind of movie that tortures the soul as you watch it. The plot is that a loving family is tortured by two uncaring, depraved young men in their own summer home. Unlike films like Devil's Rejects, Hostels, or even Silence of the Lambs, Funny Games doesn't bask in its violence. In fact, most of the violence occurs off-screen, but that doesn't take away from the abject horror you will experience. As a person who has seen hundreds of horror movies going into Funny Games, I held to my jaded attitude that nothing could really upset me at this point. And I was wrong. This movie got under my skin. It knew me, and more importantly, it knew where I was coming from with my media. Honestly, as a society, our view on violence in media has become fraudulent. The actuality of violence is terrible, and Funny Games knows that, and it's pure and unrelenting in its message that violence is an awful thing. It's sickening, and those who enjoy it are sick, even us, the audience. Perhaps it sounds a little bit preachy, but let's dive into it so I can delve into the execution of this painful, painful movie. Skip to the end now if you want to avoid all of the spoilers. As we begin the movie, we are quickly introduced to a loving family, George, Anne, and George Jr. The film takes the first 15 minutes or so to establish that they're a standard nuclear family. Anne cooks in the kitchen, gabbing to her friend arranging dinner dates, while George and Jr. prepare their sailboat outside. They even have a family dog named Lucky, who is a joyful, poorly trained pup that just kind of runs around barking his head off, like most family dogs do. This picturesque life is suddenly interrupted by a knock at the door. Our killer presents himself politely, even kindly to Anne. The most disturbing thing about Funny Games is how real it all feels. Of course a kind family like the Farbers would invite someone like that into their home. Of course they wouldn't expect anything that sinister out of them. I mean, would you? By the time they realize their situation, it's already too late. George is broken, Anne is outnumbered, and Junior's a fucking kid. No one can help them, and that's where the horror starts to sink in. It isn't like when Jason or Freddy begin their massacre, or like when Otis drags those two guys out to dig their own graves. Nah, this is real. This is closer to the heart. The Farbers let this into their home. The monsters in Funny Games don't wear masks or praise Satan or have endless influence or genius intellect. They're just a pair of regular guys. Guys that we never really learn anything about. We don't even learn their names. The credits call them Paul and Peter, but they continuously change what they call each other throughout. Because it doesn't matter. We don't learn about their motivation either. When they're asked about it by George, they just mock him for thinking any explanation would matter. The thing is, when they're mocking George, they're actually mocking us. We crave an explanation for the violence we see. Think about it. Why did Hannibal eat those people? Why did Jigsaw become a killer? Where does Jason Voorhees hail from? Eventually, we get answers to all those questions in those series. Because when we get that explanation that we've been craving, it distances us from what we saw. It satisfies us. It makes the violence particular instead of broad, which helps to make it feel more separate, more explainable. But Funny Games doesn't want to give us any outs. It wants us to face this violence, internalize it, and feel it. There's no need in this film to show us the brutality that they deal out. Why bother to show you any of it? It's not about seeing Junior get his head blown off, or George's compound fracture, or Anne's struggled last breaths. Nah, fuck that. You know what that looks like, don't you? It's more important we watch the colorless expressions of the killers as they enact this violence, and the faces of pure horror that adorn our victims. When we watch violence and death, we forget the reality of the impact it has. It takes something like Saw, Audition, or Cannibal Holocaust to get a rise out of people nowadays. We literally need to see someone carve out their own damn eye to flinch away, and honestly, even that doesn't do the trick half the time. Something as simple as a gunshot is mundane. Why care? Why would that upset you? But didn't it upset you here? Even though you didn't see it, didn't you feel something at each of those moments? Outrage, anger, disgust, all of them at the same time. I'd hope so, because you should have. By seeing the reactions to violence instead of the violence itself and lingering in those reactions, we feel what the victims feel, and what our killers feel. It's painful to experience, and that's the point. You shouldn't enjoy these actions. That in its core is the message of Funny Games. We shouldn't enjoy the violent media we consume, because Funny Games shows what violence does to people, and what people that actually enjoy violence are like. This is why Funny Games breaks the fourth wall, so it can shame us properly. Peter, the dominant killer, breaks the fourth wall multiple times to interact with us. When he makes the bet with the family that they're all going to be dead in 12 hours, he turns his eyes to the camera and says to us, "Who are you betting on? You're betting on them, aren't you?" He knows the game. In an average movie, at least one person's gonna make it. There'll be some sort of escape or final fight. That is the redemption for the pain that we, the audience, have endured. It's the responsibility of the film to give that to us. At least that's the way we feel. Think about how backwards an idea that is. The violence of the first two acts transfers into satisfaction because we see the undoing of the perpetrator. Almost all horror films follow that template because that's the way we justify the narrative to ourselves. Yet, in Funny Games, they don't just break that template, they spit on you for thinking of it. Because once again, this isn't the reality of violence. Violence doesn't have a happy ending. It never can. The director even salts the wound by having that infamous rewind scene where Peter reverses time to save Paul from being killed. Again, as if to tell you, fuck you. There is no satisfaction in this movie. You don't deserve that. Because they don't get it. The pain will be lasting for us because the pain of these characters is lasting. Because pain through violence is always lasting. If Paul had died, we would have felt relieved, even alleviated by the justice. But that's not the reality of what violence does. Even if Anne had killed Paul, she wouldn't have felt relief. Like maybe a smidge of relief, but not a lasting form. Her son was dead. There's no relief from that. Yet us, the audience, we would have felt that relief, and that's what the director wanted to show us in that moment, and then he wanted to take it away again. Everything in Funny Games works towards displaying violence in the worst possible light to reinforce the message that violence is not fun and games. And we, the audience, are wrong for wanting entertainment from the depiction of violence. Frankly speaking, the writer-director Michael Hanek's passion for this message is a little bit over the top. If you start digging into interviews about the film, he quite piously states that we are disgusting because of our media. And I don't agree with that. Even in the film, he accuses us of being complicit in murder by having that end talk on the sailboat about fiction and non-fiction being synonymous. And well, yes, this does take a bit away from the overall value of the film. At the same time, the guy has at least somewhat of a point, because this movie is so terribly unpleasant. I think the best thing for us to take from Funny Games is that we risk becoming ignorant to the reality of violence because of our media. What we see in mainstream horror is so far removed from what actual violence feels like that it does degrade our understanding of the real horror people experience. I'm not telling you to stop watching horror films because of some moral crush. But what I am saying is don't let yourself forget how you felt while you watched Funny Games, because this is the reality. Violence is cumbersome, grueling, and without redemption. This is hopefully the closest you'll ever get to feeling the trauma of the real-world victims you see on the news. Remember the outrage, disgust, anger, sadness, and powerlessness that permeates this movie because morally, we can't afford to view violence in any other light. So to wrap things up, Funny Games proves to be an entirely unique movie that meets all of the standards of a quality film in terms of cinematography, characters, acting, and pacing. But it's so rough thematically that many people outright hate it. It currently sits at 55% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 6.5 on IMDb. I really think that's wrong. This film is difficult to watch and it's not something that I view often. In fact, it's a film I only recommend to particular people because its content is that upsetting. However, I still defend this movie because, at its best, film is meant to be a gateway to a thought or idea. Whether that be a gateway to a fantastic world like Lord of the Rings, or to the inner workings of a serial killer's mind like Silence of the Lambs. On that scale, Funny Games excels. It presents Michael's argument to us in a crisp and convincing manner. You should not enjoy this movie, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It means that it's effectively conveying the message of the film. It's really rare for the creator of any form of media to purposely make something that isn't supposed to be enjoyable. But Michael states in multiple interviews that was exactly his intention. I truly find the ideas presented compelling, and moreover, I find the emotional weight of it to be beyond reproach. No one actually argues that it's a poorly made film. When you find negative reviews of Funny Games, it's unanimously because people equate watching it to torture. But does that make it a bad film? If all you look for in cinema is entertainment, then yes, this is a poor choice. But film is a form of art, and art is more than simple entertainment. This is by no means torture porn. It's not fucking August Underground. There is a point, and everything about this movie drives toward that point. Whether you agree or not, to dismiss the quality with which this message is delivered is ignorant, pure and simple. I give this film a 9 out of 10, and I stand behind that rating. Just because something is hard to watch doesn't mean it's not a great film. That was Funny Games, and I don't know. I feel a little bit dirty after talking about that one. Ooh.
But the art is that the film knew you would, and as you are a sane person, you should. You honestly should. We didn't see anything good just now. We saw something terrible, and we just need to sit there and go,
why did I watch that? Why did I...
Why was I drawn to that? Like, I knew what it was. I've seen it a lot of times. Why did I rewatch it? Well, I knew what it was.
There's a certain... I wouldn't call it an enjoyable film, and I find it a lot better than Devil's Rejects. I've seen Devil's Rejects twice. I might see it again if I need to show somebody it.
And Devil's Rejects conveys a very action-y portrayal of these characters, and Devil's Rejects almost sort of flips it near the end that you are on the side of these people rejected from their own community and dying in this wave of gun violence. Sorry if you didn't want spoilers for it, but you don't really go for it for that. You go to Devil's Rejects because you know people are going to get tortured. Yeah. It's a Rob Zombie movie. You go to Funny Games because you know people are going to get tortured. But Funny Games and Devil's Rejects both show it in a daunting light. It's just, by the end of Funny Games, it's nonchalant, it's haunting. Whereas Devil's Rejects is this fueled Leonard Skinner ending. Oh! Down in a pit of flames, and Funny Games' violence isn't cool.
No, I think it's the better movie. Like, I mean, the thing about Funny Games is, yes, it's showing you something terrible, and yes, it is disgusting. Like, if you enjoy this film...
Something's up with you. Go watch August Underground, and you're a terrible person.
Yeah, that's the best. If you enjoy those things, that's bad, but at the same time, there's an awareness within the director, within the film itself, that what it's showing you, well, it's well done, and it's unabashful in what it's doing. Like, it doesn't ever pull its punches. It doesn't try to justify itself. It knows. It knows this is terrible. It knows why it is what it is. And it knows that this is a lot of what our culture is. And there's a nice kind of social commentary underneath that redeems the film in a lot of ways. You still, like, you watch kids die. You watch... terrible shit. It's just...
I like a movie that'll have the actor break the fourth wall just to tell you, you're a piece of shit. You're the one. You're the one that pressed play.
Yep.
You know, and...
That's kind of... It's unique. It has a commentary on society, and it really escalates horror to another level. Because I think when we watch horror movies and we watch slasher flicks where people are dying all the time, it debases us in a way. And I enjoy it as much as anybody else.
But it desensitizes us to it to a point where we're like, oh, that looked fake, or oh, you know, I didn't really give a shit, and hey, it was even funny in Evil Dead, look at him go!
But people dying isn't actually funny. People being brutalized is one of the most terrible things in the world, and Funny Games shows you that.
Like, we want to go out like Ash, but we get a golf club to the foot and we watch our family die, and it's the most fucked up thing, and that is the cushion of violence that we have.
Yeah.
And I really feel that the director wanted perilously to show us that we have a fantastic view of violence that doesn't serve us well. That's unrealistic. That cripples us.
Absolutely. And I talk about that a lot in the video here and try to break that down for you. And yeah, that's really all I got to say on Funny Games.
If you disagree with us, let us know in the comments. But per the usual, if you want to do our outro.
Yeah, if you comment, subscribe, and if you really want to support us and see more content out of us, go on to Patreon and maybe throw us a bit of cash. See you guys.
See ya.